Hi everyone, this is Karak from Angry Centaur Gaming, and today, fresh from the salty seacoast and outfitted in my finest pantaloons, I bring you the review for Raven's Cry, the swashbuckling game of pirate skullduggery where you play Chris Raven, a child that's seen some serious shit. And with only one good hand to masturbate with, Chris walks the pirate walk with his pet raven in hand, taking down bounty, taking out enemies, trading ill-gotten goods, and sinking bitches' wooden lowriders like a gangster with straight-up game. But let's be honest, after Assassin's Creed Black Flag, it's going to take one hell of a game to come close to that title's excellent reflections of a pirate life, right down to the cocky attitudes, bone-bending scurvy, and melting hearts behind sinister smiles. Does Raven's Cry come close, or does it two worlds its way through the gaming environment like a janky-ass cheaper version of Black Flag? Swiggity swooty, I'm coming for your booty. Here comes the review for Raven's Cry. Graphics up first. Well, I have to say this one was a bit of a confusing situation. If I was looking back at Chris, I was surprised how good he looked with high resolution textures and some okay animation, even though he walks through the game with a look on his face you only see in, surprise, you're having butt sex Cinemax movies and people who've eaten an entire brick of fucking cheese in one day. They set his facial animation on scowl, then forgot to take it off. Even if he smiles, he's scowling, talking, scowling, running, scowling, fighting, scowling, scowling. He's scowling. The dude looks like he woke up on the wrong side of the world, let alone the wrong side of the bed, then clambered into an ill-fated voyage across the sea of ill tempers. The world itself also has moments of brilliance, with foggy and smoky swamps giving way to clean, crisp Caribbean sunsets in the blink of an eye. Environmentally, the world doesn't look too shabby. It doesn't look great, but it doesn't look bad, and the locations are actually somewhat well inhabited, making the world feel full and at the very least interesting to the eyes at times. Out in the ocean, when flinging iron balls filled with bad tidings and old voodoo curses at one another, the game doesn't look bad at all, with damage showing on the ships in spectacular fashion, with aptly sized cannonball holes riddling your decks like Swiss cheese in no time. However, nearly everything in the game graphically is hurt by something else. For instance, even on my system, the frame rate was solidly in the mid-20s, and though that's how I like my women, that shit just isn't acceptable at 920 by 1080. Additionally, there were graphical bugs in various places that brought the entire thing down a notch, and then you'll also find out that nearly everyone else in the game has like one half the texture budget resolution spent on them. And you're running around in a game filled with characters that look like a cross between McGruff the Crime Dog and a world where Vaseline replaced air. Animation is also a sore point here, with everything from the combat animations to the walking animations not linking up to the world around it, making Chris appear like he isn't actually in the world but sort of floating above it like the ghost dread pirate Roberts. Overall, moments of current gen, but almost all of it actually looks last gen. Sound, music, and voice. Sound is up first. While some of the atmospheric sounds were done well, the majority of the game was muddy and reverb heavy, regardless of the settings I've chosen. The entire sound spectrum just felt crushed together, and everything from swords to weapons to cannonballs all felt weak and without impact of almost any kind. Also, while inside locations, I swear to God, many of the sounds weren't mixed to run at the same time. You'd hear one sound, then another, but many didn't sound like they were separate. It was oddly distracting. And I'm going out on a limb here, but many sounds really did appear to have some echo in them, like they were recorded here at my desk and not at a sound box. Up next is music, and I loved it. That was a switch you probably weren't expecting. Now, we're talking purely about the soundtrack itself, like the tracks, and when we are discussing that, I have to say the music was awesome. Epic at times, moody at times, and adventurous all the times. I felt the music sometimes fit the locations, but was always well done. Unless you were talking. And then some kind of Rubik's Cube of terrible logic plus 10 came into being, and the worst possibly paced song would play. Two dudes talking at a bar does not need to have music that reminds you of Conan the Barbarian downing fools with his sword while simultaneously betting women and high-fiving Crom. And that is exactly what happens. The music is good, but almost never fits the locations perfectly and does a horrible disservice to the feeling of atmosphere throughout. I've played a lot of games, and I think that this is the worst mixing of music with actual events in a game I've ever played. Voice.
What the devil do you want? William Terrell, I challenge you for the captaincy of this vessel.
Man, I couldn't find a better example of hit and miss. The main character's a gravelly baritone dude speaking from the bottom of a barrel and snarling his way through the scenery, regardless of what is actually happening. While some of the NPCs are actually handled well, for the most part, the voices sound like Google translated from the original Resident Evil. You, the master of unlocking, need this. It's stilted and has insanely poor delivery. That's if they play at all, because apparently the developers have announced that some of the files were mismatched, so not everyone's voice files were matched up right, and here I thought occasionally NPCs were struck with temporary laryngitis. It's just bad. Gameplay. In third-person view, you run around, take missions to further your cause, unlock new abilities, which includes having a raven pick people's pockets and scratch their eyes during combat. And combat, you silly bitch. Combat, seriously, is a unique beast. First, it's like the devs woke up and said, let's make controlling Chris just a little bit harder than a man being forced to give birth to a fully grown bison with its horns facing straight towards the birth hole. I mean, in combat, movement is just horrible. A waddling, slow-to-move, pondering bag of body fluids held together by hope and twisty ties. The moment you enter it, it's a thing of wondrous disaster with zero feedback for attacks, meaning swords magically slice through dudes like someone invented the lightsaber and didn't tell anybody. At least the block button has some kind of feedback, but that coolness ends moments after it begins, and the opening for the block animation is so poorly timed, it's like a B-movie fight where everybody falls without getting hit. If you want to get an idea of just how terrible the entire thing is, strap an Xbox 360 controller on a raccoon, then just yell directions at it in French. You have about the same control here. Why French? Because raccoons don't know the language of love and they're just bastards through and through. No, I'm not joking. The control is actually that bad. Combat is terrible. Luckily, sailing the ship around is fairly cool, and when you're in battle you have various views, no aiming arc, which I actually liked, and the ability to plunder and maul until your heart's content. But that's if you get into a battle you can handle, which you almost certainly will not for ages. It's not just unbalanced, it's ludicrous. It all starts in the beautiful map screen where you click on locations and watch a small dot travel the ocean and then randomly stop when you get attacked in what can only be the most unbalanced setup I've seen since Rodman wrestled in the WWC and they pretended it was real. Coming out of your little overmap to see 3 massive galleons is about as fun as smashing your own balls with a tennis racket. I get that they wanted the game to feel dangerous, but you have to live through something occasionally, otherwise it's not called dangerous, it's called dead, which is at the end of dangerous situations, not at the goddamn starting. If you manage to sail to other ports, you can walk around in some cool locations, find missions that further your goal of revenge, and buy shit to sell at other ports, which sadly involves, once again, clicking on that fucking map and playing pirate roulette where all the numbers are whatever color you didn't choose. Now, that being said, some of the missions are cool, and you go about challenging dudes for ships, upgrading your own, fighting others, stealing ships, buying new ones, and then after all that, clicking on that goddamn map again and hoping you don't have to reload. I'm not even sure it's not a bug, because sometimes it just didn't make sense at all. You can upgrade Chris in a variety of ways, including impacting the morale of his men and other piratey things, but all of that just doesn't offset the problems with sailing and you're a fucking pirate in this game. And therein lies another problem with Raven's Cry. The design of the game seems hell-bent on throwing a ton of shit into the game with no regard to making it work or finding out if it's even fun. Sailing could be a blast, but you barely do it, and when you do, many times it's running for your life in a chess match where the other dude is both white and black, but somehow you're still expected to play. You can run around some fairly interesting places, but there's very little to do, and when it involves combat, it's lightsaber time, and that's if the enemy decides to engage with you. I counted 33 times where the enemy just backed up to steps, backed up all the way to the shoreline, backed up through crowds, just never attacked me. I must have been really scary, but it certainly wasn't from my time on the ship, which just involved me dying all the time. Fun factor, honestly, there wasn't much. Listen, I wanted to like it. It's a pirate game, and it's sort of janky like the Two Worlds or Risen series, and I'm all over those. But those games have some awesomeness within them. This is just jank for jank's sake. And Captain Scowsalot, who must be pissed because of his record for victories at sea, is an unhappy, unlikable SOB with a monotone recorder where his fucking heart should be. What does Raven's Cry get right? You know, I liked some of the environments, and when not moving, the number of people in them was actually fairly impressive. The overall looks of the levels were also enjoyable to look at. Until I moved. Ship damage was sweet looking. It actually looked really cool. I loved the effects in ships and the damage that they could impact on each other. That's about it. What does Raven's Cry do wrong? Graphics are buggy and unoptimized. 20 frames per second is not acceptable on an i7 at 4.2 gigahertz with a damn 980 GTX. Combat is terrible in all ways. Sounds are oddly timed, and they're just frankly bad, and they honestly don't sound well recorded even. And pretty much everything else. So I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or make it walk the plank rating scale. This is one title that's going to go to Davy Jones' locker. I can't suggest a purchase at any price point. It runs poorly, and the better it runs, the worse the game looks, because you finally get to see the jank even clearer. Steer away, mateys. So that's it for us. If you liked the video, hit like. If you dislike it, hit dislike. If you want to help us fund, you can go to Patreon or YouTube here and help us out. Every little bit counts. Peace out. Welcome to the Jolly Rogers, crewed by approximately 7 men.